All right, so I got the housing off. I tried to shoot a video showing basically what I used and how I got the housing off, but I really just couldn't position the camera in a good way, so I'm hoping that I can just sort of walk you through it verbally and be able to make understanding of it. I didn't use the proper tools for this, I don't think. I ended up using an old cheap Walmart chisel. I have my pry bar too, of course, but I've got one of those adjustable pry bars. You can get them out of O'Reilly's. It's actually pretty useful, but so let's see. About the one and only area that you can place a pry bar is in between this dowel and that bolt hole. There's right about in this area on the tail shaft case, there's a little area where you can kind of get behind it and then use leverage right here, and that's where I first started to get it separated. And then I came up over here, and at the corner of this bolt hole right here, you can kind of see it. I drove a chisel in and started to separate the case from the tail shaft housing, and just slowly and surely made my way up a little bit, just a little at a time, up to about the second bolt hole right there, and put a little pressure on the snout. Finally got the bottom half of the gasket to crack, and it started to leak, so I knew I was close. I ended up lowering the transmission with the jack a little bit just to gain some extra access up top, enough to where I could wedge the pry bar in between the transmission case and the tail shaft housing. And as I did that, I would use this part of the floorboard here as my leverage point. It started to separate a little bit more and more, and then finally I just sort of wiggled it off with my hands. It sort of came off pretty violently. But all of that is basically to replace that little solenoid right there. That controls fluid pressure to your transfer clutch, which is inside this little thing right here. And that's what sends power to the rear wheels. So when that goes bad, it kind of just makes it shudder, and it basically does that. So the little valve body and the solenoid, you replace that, and that should fix the problem. You can also get a kit on eBay, which I've done, where you get all new clutches for that too, and I'm contemplating whether to leave it alone and just replace that and then throw it back together, or try to replace the clutches, because if I do that and I pull that off, there's a thrust bearing behind it that I've seen in other videos, and it can go flying, and I don't really want to have to fool with that. Plus getting all the clutches aligned and then back onto that spline shaft that it's sitting on. I kind of don't really want to mess with it. But anyway, that's a job for another day, because I've about reached the end of my time being able to do anything with this right now. So basically, to sum it up, if you're trying to do this job, it's not impossible. It's a pain in the butt, but once you get the housing off, you'll definitely want to clean all this old gasket material off and use a new OE gasket. If there's any places where you've marred in my case, like I have with the pry bar or a chisel, I take I think it's like 800 grit wet sandpaper and just use whatever transmission fluid is there and basically file it all back down. And if there's any places where it's kind of rough, maybe a little dab of ultra gray to kind of fill the spots in. You probably need ultra gray to hold your gasket still, and slide the tail shaft housing back on and you should be good to go. So, but anyway, hopefully this is educational for someone trying to do this. So anyway, I'll see you around.